but the big thing that has shifted vis-a-vis, let's say, the world of 1913, pre-World War I, is that we feel like we are in an apocalyptic age. That there is there is a dimension of science and technology that has a dark dimension, and it's a trap that humanity may be setting for itself. And I don't like Greta, and I don't like the full precautionary principle, but her argument that we have just one planet isn't entirely wrong. Mm-hmm. And
so you see this shift in part as a shift from the ethos of progress, that the priori assumption.
Yeah, but I don't want to abstract it too much. It is actually, it's the specific nature of the progress that happened. It is, we got thermonuclear weapons. We are powerful enough to affect the environment. I'm not sure whether carbon dioxide is the most important dimension, but there are probably a lot of dimensions where the environment can be impacted in very radical ways. We can probably build very dangerous bioweapons. Maybe that's even what was going on in the Wuhan lab. We can, there are dimensions of AI that are, potentially violent and very dangerous. And you don't have to necessarily believe all these sort of weird pictures where it's this super intelligence that's somehow completely disembodied and is going to kill every last human being on the planet. But there are natural ways to combine it with weapons technology that feel
unsettling.
And just a simple example is that we have this drone technology. That's again a new form of technology that's come to the fore in the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, and you have a human in the loop, but the human can get jammed, and so the natural fix is to put AI on the drones and turn these into more autonomous weapon systems, and that's
inevitable.
That seems like the natural, logical thing to do, and then even I, as a pro-tech person, have to say I find that somewhat unsettling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me lay these ideas out again and summarize. So one of the threads that you were developing was, we'll do two at the same time. One was that the scientific process, in terms of physical reality, maybe, in your view, peaked in the 1960s. And then you could imagine that you kind of outlined two maybe reasons for that. One was fear of the apocalyptic consequences of that technology and an escape into various forms of abstraction. So some of those abstractions were psychological abstractions, inner journeys, but some of it also was escape into digital abstraction. And then you also made a case that the avenue for exploration in the digital realm was still open. And so maybe we could understand this. So
and then the digital realm, and then in some ways even these escapes weren't full escapes. So AI, it seems to be just about bits, not atoms. But then if you combine it with a drone, the AI comes back to the physical real world.
Well, we'll get back to that, back to the overlap. But so you could imagine that, so the scientific approach, the method, produced an explosion of technological consequences. Many of them were dramatic in the physical world. There was kickbacks against that. One of the kickbacks was the apocalyptic element. The other was the turn away from spirituality, you might say. But then there was also the counterposition that always develops in after any revolution, is that things get tangled up in red tape in weird ways. Like the scientific, I was just in Uzbekistan, and they developed a pretty sophisticated industrial economy in the last 5 years. And part of the reason that they could do that was because there was nothing in the way, right? Because Uzbekistan was kind of devoid of impediments to radical entrepreneurship in the aftermath of the communist default. Now, you could imagine that for a good time, the scientific method was so powerful that it was producing revolutions nonstop, and the legal and bureaucratic frameworks were lagging it. And so they caught up quite remarkably by the 1970s, and that left the digital space still open. And it is kind of a free-for-all space.
Yeah, but the way you're telling the story it has too much of this timeless and eternal character. This is just what always happens, and
right.
progress.
Well, that is what I'm
So
wondering.
you always, whereas the story I want to tell has more of a one-time and world historical character to it, where it is, there were lots of inventions where people figure out cures for diseases. That didn't say, okay, now we have to take a step back and cure fewer diseases. It actually encourages you to double down on that and do even more. Or we have all these machines that replace humans in factories, and there's some downsides to it, and there are labor problems with the Industrial Revolution, and there's a lot of pollution. But on the whole, the good way outweighs the bad, and there was no big regulatory counter movement in Victorian
Let
Britain.
me make a counter example.
But then we get to something like thermonuclear weapons, and that specifically has a very different character. It has a really different character. And probably, I don't know, by the 1950s and 1960s, baby boomers get, you're a kid, you get brought up on Dr. Seuss and not on adventure stories. And it probably changes childhood education. It changes the way we form and develop human beings. And so it leads to a society where, science and technology no longer have quite of this former valence. There's always sort of an interesting big picture history question of how much science and technology, how they were entangled with Christianity in the West, and were they they were somehow entangled, but was it meant as a complement, where you're sort of encouraged to understand God's creation, and this is sort of a way that it's a fulfillment,
furtherance
of this, or was it meant to be a substitute, where it was an alternate way to build heaven on earth without requiring God? And it was a radical life extension was sort of a important part of the early modern project. Benjamin Franklin, Condorcet, all these people thought that you could perhaps indefinitely prolong human life, and so I think early modernity, it wasn't the only thing. There were a lot of complicated things going on, but a lot of it had sort of an anti-biblical valence, and you could say that 17th and 18th century scientists, and again, this is where I think someone like Francis Bacon needs to be interpreted as a hardcore materialist atheist, and it is we need to stop religion because it's slowing down this wonderful scientific progress. And then I've had this Bacon discussion with a number of people lately, and they all think, no, that can't be right. Bacon was just this somewhat heterodox Christian. And because in late modernity, where we find ourselves, again, it's complicated to describe what's going on culturally, but in late modernity, it's the atheist liberals that are anti-science at this point. And so if you think about Hollywood,
Richard Dawkins' despair.
Yeah, you have to think of Richard Dawkins as a representative of early modernity. He is like a fossil from before 1789.
He's the last of the Enlightenment.
He's the last. He's a fossil from before 1789, and Greta is more representative. Or if you think about the Hollywood atheist liberals, the movies are all about technology that doesn't work. It's scary, and so to the extent. The way the anti-Christian argument gets made in late modernity is that it's God's fault, but this time it's God's fault for putting us on this whole dangerous project in the first place. And it's like the lines in Genesis: "You shall have dominion over the earth." So in the 17th and 18th century, the Christian God was blamed for slowing down the scientific technological project. In the 20th and 21st century, the Christian God gets blamed for speeding it up, speeding up, keeping it going. So it's that the invariant is the Christian God always gets blamed. But the fact that it's the exact opposite tells us something very interesting about how this is.
What does it tell us? Now that's interesting, because you're making the point that two opposite arguments are making that are both directed towards furthering Nietzsche's death of God, let's say. So then that begs the question: what's the actual motivation?
The only point I'll make is that we're again in a very different place with science and technology than we were in the 17th, 18th century. 17th, 18th century, I don't think people would have said, yeah, we're going to make all this progress and then there's going to be a lot of pushback and it'll get regulated. I know the thought was we'll make a lot of progress and it'll be so good that it will actually then accelerate and it will, it'll smash religion even more and then we can go even faster and it'll go even better. And it's going to have this sort of unraveling, accelerating effect. And then in the 20th, 21st century, we make